Our guest today is Annette Freyberg from Amsterdam University. She is a professor in international relationships. So, dear Annette, may I ask you the first question? What is the mood in so-called Western Europe regarding the war in Ukraine, regarding no-fly zone policy, regarding the changes in the politics of Berlin now to green light for heavy weapons? What is the mood on your part of Europe?
Thank you. That's a very big question, of course. The mood is not good. Everybody is worried. Everybody is appalled at the war and feeling extremely sorry for what's happening to Ukrainians. But people are also worried about the war spreading. And this is the dilemma that everyone is acutely aware of, the politicians, the leaders, as well as I think most ordinary people, as long as they watch any news at all, have that same dilemma that on the one hand, we would very much like to take a clear side in this war on the side of Ukraine. There's rarely a war in which it's so clear that there's a good side and a bad side. So you do want to take the good side. But at the same time, there's a worry that if you overstep certain boundaries, you might get drawn into the war itself, or maybe if your country doesn't get drawn into the war, if I'm thinking a country like the Netherlands, may not itself be so worried about being pulled into this war, but would still be worried about the war spreading, for example, by involving Germany or other countries that are part of the European Union.
And I have a question as well related to the first question. And I just checked one of the first your book about what makes man. And, actually, it's very interesting for this time, because probably everybody could ask you what moves Gerhard Schröder and what moves, for example, Olaf Scholz or Merkel or Putin, actually. And your approach is realistic theory, realistic theory, which is not realpolitik. But in any way, so you have some theoretical approach about such kinds of people, and you wrote a lot about motivations of such people. What's your opinion about this situation between Schröder, Merkel and Putin and Germany? What makes man?
Well, Schröder, frankly, in this day and age, he's only an embarrassment for Germans. He doesn't matter anymore politically. Obviously, for a long time, he hasn't mattered. And he's embarrassing us all over the world by refusing to lay down his posts with Russia affiliated with Gazprom and other companies working in the service of Putin. But he doesn't matter, so he's really insignificant. Merkel is, I think, extremely glad not to be chancellor anymore at this time. She left just in time. Olaf Scholz, of course, is getting a lot of criticism for taking his time to decide on delivering heavy weapons. This is a big discussion in Germany right now. It was a big discussion just today, earlier in the German parliament, when the decision about delivering the tanks was made in favor of delivering the tanks. I'm on the side of those Germans who believe that he did right to think carefully about what he would do, because this is not the sort of decision you should make based on an emotional response. Oh, poor people in Ukraine, we're going to deliver tanks. This has to be thought about carefully because it bears serious risks. About Putin, you asked me about him, and stereotypical international relations theory driven behavior. He's the easiest of them all in the sense that he is behaving like a picture book cliche offensive realist. Has been behaving like that since, well, already in 2014. So from the point of view of someone who writes about theories trying to explain foreign policy behavior, he's an easy case. He is an offensive realist who has met with the Western European leaders' counterparts that by and large act like liberal institutionalists. And the two don't talk to each other. They talk past each other. And this is what's been happening for a number of years.
Well, I ask this question because your approach between your books, I found that you build bridges between critical theory and realist theory. This is very as well interesting. I need to explain that realist theory, it means some kind of epistemological approach, which could as well criticize the realpolitik. But in any way, my question is that about, this approach presupposes critique of recognition or recognition of recognition, if you would like. I mean that many of Ukrainians or Eastern Europeans talk about some traumatic approach to the political affairs, political events between German politics because they feel guilty. And this guilty means some kind traumatic reaction on the Russian politics as well, Putin. And that it means that now, after Olaf Scholz, Germans started to recognize their form of irrational recognition of this guilty of Second World War and to criticize their own recognition before cognition, that's we do our cognitive action after irrational recognition of some kind of situation. And this first recognition is always not always, but sometimes between Germans are very traumatic. And we consider it, Ukrainians consider it, that this traumatic issue is there some kind of obstacle for contemporary political solutions of EU development, even, or defense, or the other. What's your opinion about this one?
I can understand how that would be a common interpretation. I think what's being underestimated is the role of generational change here, because we're not dealing with the same people coming to a new realization. We're dealing with a new generation of people coming to power who themselves do not have the direct memories of World War II and therefore cannot feel to the same extent guilt towards Russia that now makes them tread extremely carefully when it comes to Ostpolitik. So I think there is such a shift, but it's more of a generational shift than a psychological shift. And as a generational shift, it's very plausible. And we see this also within political parties. We see this in the SPD, for example, where there's clearly an older generation that has had a harder time shifting towards more extensive support for the Ukrainian forces. And a younger, and I'm not, of course, there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, the younger generations in the same party being more willing to embrace what in the German media is often called a Zeitenwende, a real time shift in German outlook towards the East and towards its own role in European security and defense.
But in Netherlands, I would like to ask as well, because you are in Amsterdam, and we hear that Amsterdam even sent earlier some arms for heavy arms, for Ukrainian forces, and we just heard some kind of slogan from Netherlands that we are not Germans. We're sending, is it true?
I have not heard that one. I have not heard that one. That would have been diplomatically not very nice thing to say. It may have been said by someone, but it's not in the news.
But what I wanted to ask,
let me make a quick point about that. It is Germans. The German army is actually training Ukrainians to use the Dutch howitzers, so it's all connected.
Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to continue, Gintautas, the previous question that what is, in a way you already answered about the generational shift, but this position of pacifism as a valued Germany as a pacifist state, on the 27th of February, when Scholz delivered his speech in Bundestag, he kind of made a paradigmatic shift that Germany should, quoting him, Germany should evaluate Russian military capabilities and to compare with its own military capabilities and to make conclusions how much Germany should invest in its own defense. Some parliamentarians were booing and whistling against it, but it was evidently a minority because the majority started to applaud. That was on February 27th, 3 days after the war started in Ukraine. And here in Lithuania, we started discussing it as a paradigmatic shift in Germany's militaristic approach. Of course, this is very misused by Kremlin's propagandists who say, look, it's back to the past, and that's what they are using the past. But in the same speech, whether it was Scholz or someone else, on the same day, there was another statement that history should remain history and today is today.
Yeah, I know that internationally and also to some extent within Germany itself, although considerably less, this has been discussed as a major a breakthrough or shift, as a really big deal. But in fact, it was long overdue. And it was long overdue for two reasons. It was long overdue in the sense that Germany has not been spending the required 2% of its gross domestic product on defense for a long time. That requirement isn't there for nothing. The German military is woefully unequipped, under-equipped, and weapons systems are anachronistic, not functioning to a large extent. Even such basic things as bulletproof vests are missing. So in short, the German military is in a terrible state, and we've known this for years. And previously, governments didn't do anything about that. And now there's been a wake-up call, and now they're saying, okay, now we should do something about that. So in that sense, this is not surprising. This is overdue. And it's also overdue for a second reason, because we know that the US security umbrella under which Western Europe could stay dry during the Cold War, that had been becoming precarious for a long time. Trump kept saying, Europeans, step up, pay for your own defense. The US isn't going to keep doing it. So already during that time, there could have been a breakthrough towards Europeans trying to do more to ensure their own defense. It wasn't. Trump went away. Still, Europeans dragged their feet. And now what happened is that Olaf Scholz in this speech for the first time acknowledged that Germany has to think about deterrence for itself, and no longer look to the Americans to basically deter all possible enemies so that Germany can focus on other things and not spend so much money on its own defense. This is not only true for Germany, this is true also for other NATO states that are having to make the same, they're having to have the same sorts of thoughts, right? So both these developments, the underdevelopment of the German military and the withdrawal of the US from Europe, have been going on for a long time. And you could say, finally, someone in power is acknowledging that it took the Ukraine war, it took Russia really overstepping any imaginable boundaries to produce this kind of wake-up call.
You wrote a lot about globalization theories as well. And you know that Henry Kissinger and as well the others, Brzezinski, for example, as well criticized EU that it's not a pole of strength, that EU is not one of the important center of the world because it has no necessary power, no military, first of all, no that's ambitions, because no organizational, because it's, the different countries vote for different interests, especially in the Council of European Union. and now after the beginning of Russian aggression, we see some consolidation in EU, some, attempts to build, stronger power in any way. And the question as well is about the position of Germany. You little bit answer about this question to Tomas. It's about politics of military forces, but ordinary Russia would like to present the Germans' military forces as a Germans, with some aspirations to this, propaganda Second World War. But we consider differently. We consider it as a central point, or one of the central point of EU forces, and the EU building security as well, independent, or playing the more significant role on global map than in previous time. And what's your opinion about the role of contemporary Germany after 24th of February, in the building of EU as a global power? Do you see critically, or just what's your opinion?
Well, first of all, I would love for military and security policy in the EU to be Europeanized, and I think the current German government and also an imaginable alternative German government led by the CDU would be among the actors in Europe pushing for that. So against the nationalization of military policy in Europe. But Germany can't do it alone. And I'm really concerned about developments elsewhere. If Marine Le Pen can almost win the French presidential elections, then I'm worried about the prospects for a common European security policy. So it requires the critical mass among European powers. Probably it requires at some point a multi-tier Europe where a group of avant-garde goes ahead and Europeanizes while others stand aside and watch for a while and then hopefully also join. In this way, it might be possible to go in that direction. As you know, we have been going in that direction, but extremely slowly and timidly for the past decades.
So you know that
Germany would be. This is the important point. I think Germany would be among the proponents of that trend.
Yesterday, me and Gintautas had this program recording with a professor from Mariupol University, who spent 16 days without electricity, being bombarded, but luckily somehow he escaped. He gave us an interview from Lvov University, and what he told us that in Mariupol, unfortunately, according to him, not all the people believe that Russians are the aggressors to blame, because some people who have Soviet mentality there, with kind of technical education, as he told, Mariupol universities do not have humanity studies.
And it's before 1991. Mariupol doesn't have humanity studies. Then later they started, this develop humanities, as some kind of Ukrainization of this territory. But in another way, what's happened, I will continue, Tomas, that's happened that labor power, these manufacturers, as well, like in Donetsk, as well, this so-called proletariat, was very oriented to the ideology of Soviet Union. And they don't recognize the Ukraine as some, central point for the belief of workers, that for future, in any way, they had some mythological aspirations. And actually, this is critical approach to the events of Mariupol and Donbass. Why it's happened? Because the people was not involved into Ukrainian culture. They mostly labor power. And there many of problems happened. But could you, Tomas, continue the question?
Yeah, and my question is that this group of people blame Ukrainian army for all this bombarding, because if the Ukrainian army would have withdrawn, would not have resisted, maybe then Russian army would not have bombarded Mariupol. And I wonder if any of that kind of confusion regarding the heroics of Ukrainian army is in Western part of EU.
Oh, I don't know if it's confusion. It's probably true that if Ukrainians had not resisted, there would not have been so much death and destruction if they had just given in. The question is whether you think it's worth fighting for what you're fighting for to the extent that you're fighting for it. And people will make different judgments about that. If you identify more strongly with Russia than with the Ukrainian nation, if you would have no problem living in a region controlled by Russia, then you would not want to see your house bombed and your family killed in order to avoid that, because you don't think it's such a big problem. If you are attached to the Ukrainian nation and you feel that your identity group is being attacked in an atrocious way by an enemy, then you're willing to go to great lengths to fight that enemy back. And people in Ukraine, living in Ukraine, think differently about that and will therefore respond differently to the war.
But this question relates to the other question, about using of nuclear power, nuclear bombs against Europe. And many of European politicians said, okay, if Ukrainians will not resist, or they stopped resist, and it means that we will be in peaceful and safely position. And but it as well, the others who would like to oppose this opinion, they maintain that, look, at the Hitler time, and some of countries said, okay, we don't need to resist, okay, everybody will accept Hitler, and he could organize later Holocaust or someone else, and even labor power could accept, look, Hitler comes to us, just we could save our factories to work, peacefully, and we could just, blame Jewish people or some the other people, Romas, because what does it mean about this one? And but in a way, I'm sure that in Europe there are many of people who thinks very similarly. Please don't resist Putin and his threats, because you see that is possible to survive for us, for all of us. Could we pay millions or people, life of people, or even billion of people, for the freedom of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think in fact there's very few people, they do exist, but there are not many who would really want to appease Putin, who say, just give him what he wants and then he'll leave us alone. Because I think it's become quite clear that he wouldn't stop there. And he has made clear that he wouldn't stop there. Think about the Republic of Moldova right now, where people are extremely worried. Well, I'm speaking to Lithuanians who are also...
Yeah, we're very worrying as well, every day and every hour, I would say.
That's why we understand Israel much better now. Living under volcano all the time.
Yeah. I think only very dogmatic pro-Russians and confused people really think that appeasing Putin would be a good idea. But of course you can fight back in many ways. You can fight back militarily, but then there are also the sanctions. And there is actually more support, I believe, in Western European populations for stronger sanctions than what our politicians dare to use. I think that quite a lot of people would be willing to tighten their belts, as it were, put an extra sweater on in the winter, allow the prices to increase for a while in order to paralyze the Russian regime by withdrawing income from it. I think there the room hasn't been entirely used yet, the room that there is in support from the population. For the people who want to primarily work with military support, one thing that worries me a lot is that I'm wondering whether these people have thought through to the end game, because I'm not sure where this is then supposed to go. So if you imagine we keep giving Ukrainians more tanks and artillery and everything they need, of course this is going to prolong the war. But then what? How will this end? Well, can you imagine a scenario in which Putin at some point just gives up and goes back home and then sits on his hands? I have a really hard time seeing that end game. And if that's not likely to happen, then what will happen? Will he at some point decide to throw a nuclear bomb? So these are the things we need to think about, because we can't just say, let's just give them all the weapons we have. Where is this supposed to go? I'm also curious, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and you see, that's two questions. The military and economic are very related. Many of Europeans politicians agree about this one. But the question is not about how many Europeans are ready, to pay more for gas or petroleum, but it's as well the role of EU as a global power, to negotiate with China or India, or to other countries to stop. Because if we don't buy this gas or petroleum or the other, Russia could organize the other way, maybe they will lost some money, okay, on the market. Okay, China will buy cheaper, much more cheaper, but in another way, this is resource. They have a lot of this gas, and Gazprom could survive as well. And if EU will not play more active, proactive role, but this is as well question again about EU. What does mean EU in the world? Could EU help in the from economical point of view? And as I know, you are very involved as well into economical studies. And what's your opinion about the role of EU in this sanctions politics and possibilities?
But before Annette answers to this question, I would like to answer to her question about the end. What is the end? I personally agree with multi-time world chess champion Garry Kasparov, long-time opponent of Putin. His opinion is that hopefully the end will be such huge inattentions among Kremlin oligarchs and Putin's environment that on the one side, economic sanctions will create that tension, but on the other hand, very serious and successful Ukrainian army's resistance, losses of Russian army will also, on the other hand, create tensions among military generals. And then that kind of combination will overthrow Putin's regime. So this is Kasparov's vision, and this is the most preferable end for me personally, but perhaps Gintautas has a better vision.
No, it's from the dreams, if you will check many of authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, sanctions and such hopes never helped for such kind of end. Because good authoritarian power, many times they organize bodyguards, good security, they escape from these generals. Probably he could arrest it even earlier, all these generals, than generals him, But in another way, we don't have, I believe, maybe you have Annette answer. I don't trust too much even Garry Kasparov. And in another way, that question is about weakening of Putin's power, and economy is one of the instruments. But how to do it if EU doesn't play a necessary important global role? How do you see the role of EU in this economical politics?
I see it quite positively. I see the Commission taking its role in coordinating a sanctions regime against Russia, and this is very much done in coordination and cooperation among the EU member states, with Ursula von der Leyen taking an important leading role. Like I said, I think there is room for stronger sanctions, but I was frankly surprised by what seemed possible that would have been thought impossible just a few months earlier, where even Germany is now saying by the end of the year 2022 they can be off Russian gas, and other countries quicker than that. So I see movement. Almost as much movement as possible. I think there's still room for tougher sanctions. But what you pointed out in your question, which is absolutely correct, is that the EU, while an important economic player in the world, is not the only important economic player and not the only possible buyer for Russian gas and oil. And it will be very important how China behaves in this conflict. And this is the big China question, right? It comes up in every discussion. What's China going to do? And we just don't know. I think a very significant statement was made by the Foreign Secretary of China in late February, I think it was, when he said that Russia should realize that we are not allies, we are strategic partners, which means that China will consider in every case what its own interest is and act accordingly. And this was an important statement because it basically said, if you look at it negatively as Putin would have looked at it, we're not really friends. You cannot expect us to be loyal to you. We will cooperate with you if we think on the balance that's in our own best interest, and if we think in the balance it's not, we won't. And this can be, to some extent, reassuring for us, I think, because if we manage to make China see things in such a way that, on balance, it's better for them to act with us and not with Russia, then it will. So for me, that's an important hope. I also share Kasparov's hope, by the way, but I think it's a hope. I'm not sure how likely it is, not only because of the crackdown internally, but also because so many people who do have the guts to speak up and have alternative visions are already outside of Russia, and I'm not sure how much they can even do from where they are currently located. So, yeah.
If I may, to shift our conversation more towards human rights issues, considering our European Second World War traumatic experience, Holocaust, concentration camps, how much effort not only Germany but many other countries, including Lithuania, has invested into guilt and memory of traumatic experience, and our values are so that it would never be repeated. And I've been following BBC and CNN, and I'm very glad that it seems like it is reported sufficiently and quite enough about genocide in Ukraine, about Bucha alone, so many atrocities. That intercepted phone calls by Russian military persons bragging to their wives in Russia how they were even raping Ukrainian women, or some other horrible details about tanks crushing legs of Ukrainian civilians. And now it's 21st century in Europe. After so many decades, we've been talking about the Holocaust and how many films there have been made by Hollywood, our awareness, Schindler's List. And to what extent do you feel that Western European societies feel that It's right now happening. History is being repeated. Maybe I'm no longer capable of reading a book about Auschwitz because there is Bucha in Ukraine.
Yes. People are aware. Maybe three aspects are worth mentioning. On the one hand, you have the older generation for whom old memories that were long buried are coming up again, and many of whom are reporting some kind of re-traumatization or reawakening of old trauma when they look at the pictures and the Second World War comes back. Our children are dreaming about war. A few days after this started, my daughter, who was 13, came to me and said, I dreamt that there was war in our street and I was hiding under a staircase and a soldier came and pulled me out and shot me. So then for me, the films come back to life. Second World War documentary films come back to life in a really shocking way. And mental health providers, psychiatrists report that many people have difficulty coping with, on the one hand, knowing that this is going on and it's going on right here next door. And at the same time, life goes on as usual because the war is not here in the Netherlands. You have to go to work in the morning. You have to do the things you normally do. So this strange tension of life as usual going on, while you also know that this is going on. I think everyone feels this, and people cope with this in different ways. Some people try not to think about it. Of course, you push it away. It's a common reaction. Other people maybe drink more than they usually do. Others go to the psychiatrist. But no, the images are there, and the reporting is there, and nobody can say they don't know what's going on.
Yeah, but you know that very similar events happened in Srebrenica in Yugoslavia period. You know, at very strong, you know, that's as well killing, persecution, torturing, you know, raping, everything happened in this Yugoslavia period. But in any way, in this time, world community find power. NATO have found power to stop because this, you know, many of solution as well with military planes and bombing of Belgrade. You know, we remember this situation. And what happened later, that everything was turned into trial against war criminals. And that the data was collected about the president of Yugoslavia. No, in this Yugoslavia period, the last one,
Milosevic.
Milosevic, yeah. Milosevic later. But in any way, this ordering to arrest Milosevic was prepared before arrest in any way. And now Ukrainians and many of politicians as well talking, could we do the same with Putin, you know, to organize some trial, some commission as well, in order to arrest him, to give order, you know, to arrest him in any country, in any way, because if you will look at the Yugoslavian period, Milosevic was quite popular until this one solution of trial, you know, about the possible guilty, not the guilty, but, you know, to invite to him to start this legal procedure, you know. And this is as well very important for many of people, you know, to recognize that criminals will be pushed at the end, you know, that they will get the you know, that's what they cost.
Yeah, no, I would be for that, but the main reason why one might want to be careful is for the same reason why one might want to be careful about a no-fly zone. The problem is with the enforcement.
Nuclear.
Right? It's about the enforcement. What you can declare a no-fly zone, or you can declare Putin a war criminal, but if then you can't back that up by action, by shooting down planes or going into Moscow to arrest Putin and drag him out by the collar, you may even weaken the idea of international law, because you make the pronouncements or you announce the verdict, but then there's no enforcement. I think in this particular case, I would go ahead, even without the likelihood of enforcement. We can't imagine it now. It may be possible at some point, because it would help strengthen the almost worldwide consensus around what is acceptable and what is entirely non-acceptable behavior for the leader of a nation state. And I think in our contemporary context, where international norms are weakening and embattled, that would send an important signal. So that is why I would think that the legal possibility should be investigated for doing something like that.
But at the moment, we're witnessing a pattern of those politicians who are close in a relationship with Putin. Macron, who keeps calling Putin, keeps having conversations, and we don't really know what they are talking about for 2-3 hours, because we don't get a transcript. God knows what's there, and namely Macron. That's why I'm not. Of course, I'm happy that it's not Le Pen, but Macron, I think, is a lesser evil. Because Macron is the one who says, don't use the word genocide, whereas Americans, Biden is openly saying Putin is a criminal, Putin is responsible for genocide. And I see this pattern. Those who are openly in help for Ukrainian defense, their rhetoric is straightforward. We know what is good and what is evil. Whereas in Europe, the continent of Holocaust, there is ambivalence. What is evil? What is genocide? Supposedly, we have to investigate a lot. And this is, I think, exactly what Kremlin propagandists want. Do investigation. It will take your bureaucracy 10 times. By that time, Putin will die his own death.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Putin is happy if we, wreck our brains with self-doubt and become incapable of acting decisively. But that doesn't mean that we should, go too far in the other direction and paint the world in black and white. I think Europeans have become careful about making clear pronouncements about what's good and what's bad, also because, well, in the case of Germans, they realized that they had it wrong, significantly wrong, at some point in human history, several points in human history, and that for your own sake and for the world's sake, it is good to question yourself if you feel very sure about something. It's a balancing act, right? You shouldn't feel too sure of yourself, because chances are then you're being ideological or dogmatic and you're failing to see something. But you also shouldn't be paralyzed because you're going on with doubting beyond the point at which that is still reasonable. So there's not an easy way out. I'm surprised, frankly, by how decisive Biden has expressed himself. I think Americans were surprised by that as well. He didn't have the reputation of being really that kind of a go-getter, I tell him. Maybe it's also because he feels he has little time left.
And this is the question of contemporary informational war as well, propaganda. And, Putin use and Kremlin use the word of denazification, which is very, clear and could be clear for some of Germans, like denazification after Second World War. But in a way, it probably means the other. We call paralogism, you know, when you use the same word with a different content in this situation. But in a way, this is very useful for propaganda, and as well, Russians call Ukrainians Nazi, you know, or fascist as well. They organize denazification. Many of Russian patriots supports Putin for this reason, because fighting against Nazis, like, you know, that means Russian deal, Russian, you know, destination, Russian. It corresponds Russian history, like this history is, that's
link right back to the Second World War.
They continue the work of fathers and grandfathers, but from the other side, what kind of influence this propaganda does in Europe? Because I know that when many times I was in Berlin, for example, and I watched that you couldn't, for example, watch Ukrainian TV channels nowhere, but only Russian channels, TV, tens and tens of them, and many of people who could understand Russian language, but there are many, probably 3, 4, or even more millions of people in Germany could speak Russian. They understand what they are talking. And they understand as well that Russians provide this denazification, and probably it corresponds to the politics and history of Germany. In denazification, it looks like the same, you know, it's like fighting for democracy. And how the Germans react on this such kind of propaganda about denazification of Ukraine?
Yeah, no, there are unfortunately people who fall for the propaganda, and they exist on both the right and the left. Strangely, a part of the German extreme right, a large part of the German extreme right, has become very Russia-friendly and Putin-friendly. And even though they may also sympathize with Nazis of the past, they sympathize now with Putin over the presumed Nazis of Ukraine. It's crazy, but that's how those people think. And then you have on the extreme left also some people who follow the Russian media and believe Russia is our friend, or should be our friend politically, ideologically speaking, and who actually believe, or seem to actually believe, that Russian forces are fighting fascists in Ukraine. Luckily, this is not a majority position, but these people do exist, and some of them in the social media in particular, they don't make it into the evening news, but on social media, these people can find a following and convince others. So that is there. Incidentally, the use of the word denazification, it reminded me of a phenomenon that we've seen since the fall of the wall in Eastern Europe, using the label communists to put your enemies in a bad light. So for many years, all you had to say is, those are the communists, or the former communists, and someone was discredited. So this is not new, and Putin learned this also from the use of words like former communists in Eastern Europe, I think. So that works, unfortunately, that works. And his ability to point the finger at the Azov Brigade and make that link, as saying, I'm fighting in Mariupol, I'm particularly fighting those, they're the fascists, and because they, of course, in the past, when they were founded, were openly fascist. And so when you are making up a conspiracy theory like that, you take the kernels of truth that you can find and weave them together in this, unfortunately, fairly convincing for some people story.
And since we mentioned medias and all these propaganda instruments, how do you evaluate Zelensky's role, who is counter-propaganda, media success, and successfully addressing parliaments in various countries, not giving up lots of energy. Do you see him as a figure who is now so successful as a role model, courageous president? Not only because he's on the righteous side and Putin is on the evil side, but also because of his public communication skills. But what is your impression as an international relations professor?
He certainly has the public communication skills. I wonder if he also has the political leadership skills in peace times, because he didn't do much to solve the problems between 2014 and beginning of 2022. So that's why I don't see him one-sidedly as a heroic, fantastic figure. And I think anyway, one needs to be careful. He's not some kind of new Super Rambo with great PR skills. He's an enigmatic figure. It is certainly admirable, and he is admired also in Western Europe for his standing power, his sheer standing power. You know, people will say things like, does this man ever sleep? And, you know, every single one of his public appearances has this aura of strength and determination. And he certainly helps, he motivates his armed forces. So in all those things, he's doing remarkably well. But he's also, and I'm not blaming him for the war by any stretch of the imagination, but some of the problems that brought us here have also been, they occurred under his watch. Let me put it like that.
Perhaps, Gintautas, you would like to summarize or to ask the very, very last question before we thank our guest?
Okay, in a way, I'm interested, you know, in your theoretical approach as well, you know, epistemological and theoretical, what you are doing as a researcher, you know, and could you explain what, for example, does realism in international relations as a theory helps for you to understand what's going on now on the arena of Ukraine and around this one area? Could you explain from your theoretical position? Does it works?
Does it help me? It certainly helps me. At a certain moment, I always suspected that Putin was at heart an offensive realist. But when actually already in 2014, I decided that that was definitely the game he was playing, that helps you see things in a different light, because it's an interpretive frame that allows you to interpret his actions as part of a larger pattern. And then you know what he wants. And you know what, if you know what he wants, you know what he's going to do. He has defined the Russian national interest in a particular way. And he is out to maximize that interest and the power that his government and he personally have to safeguard that interest, to make that interest come true. So yes, it definitely helps, because it's like, you can see it like deciding which game is being played. And while the European Union was still, and NATO was still playing a liberal institutionalist game, we're trying to tie him into international institutions, strategic partnerships, trade relations, interdependence. And then that way we will slowly socialize him to be one of us, so we can have peaceful relations and mutual benefit. That was the game that EU and NATO were playing, and he was playing an entirely different game. He's been playing an entirely different game probably already since the beginning of his career in national politics. And when you realize that the way in which these parties interact with each other, attempt to interact with each other, isn't going to work. So at the very least, we in the West need to realize that he is playing in a different game, and we need to change our policies towards him accordingly. So this is what makes understanding these theoretical lenses through which we look at foreign policy and international relations very useful.
Thank you very much for participating in our